of the best ways we can care for our planet and achieve the goal of Half Earth is to understand everything we can about the species of our planet and how they work together in ecosystems to support our lives. E.O. Wilson's sense in this moment is that if everyone, especially young students, participates in the discovery and experiences the honor and privilege of creating and improving our understanding, that it will be a transcendent moment for ourselves and for our planet. Transformative moments of discovery that guide our lives in a new direction are rare and special moments. So to all the educators and communities for a Half Earth future joining us today, thank you for renewing our sense of common purpose during this critical time, and for inspiring and connecting students and people everywhere with the natural world. I'm very pleased to introduce Dennis Liu, Vice President of Education at the E.O. Wilson Biodiversity Foundation, lead of the Half Earth Project Educator Ambassador Program, and moderator of our next session, Inspiring the Next Naturalist.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the education session of Half Earth Day 2020. I'm so glad that you've joined us to celebrate Half Earth Day, and now in particular to learn more about how we're engaging the next generation stewards of our planet. Many of the presenters and panelists that you are about to meet have connected with us through our Half Earth Project Educator Ambassador Program. Our Ambassador Program was launched in 2018 during Half Earth Day celebrations at the American Museum of Natural History. During Half Earth Day 2018, we offered a workshop exclusively for educators focused on ways to engage students in the challenge of making conservation decisions to reach the goal of Half Earth. We also introduced educators to the beautiful digital Half Earth map. More than 80 teachers attended the workshop. It was oversubscribed, and it was an amazing, energetic, really fun session. Many of those teachers then signed up to become our first Half Earth Project Educator Ambassadors. The ambassadors are a network of people devoted to finding ways to bring biodiversity and conservation learning to their students across the curriculum and in many disciplines, not just the sciences. There's lots of opportunity for all sorts of people to think, learn, and weigh in on how we can conserve biodiversity. I'm happy to say that 2 years later, we have nearly 600 educators in our ambassador network, along with several hundred members of a private Facebook group. If you're happen to be a middle school, high school, or college teacher, I hope that you'll consider joining our network. We also have educators who work in nature centers and museums and other out-of-classroom places, and they are fantastic contributors to this network. Now, if you're not a teacher, I'm sure that you know one, and I hope that you'll share our ambassador program with any teachers you happen to know who might be interested. Well, our network continues to grow every week, as does the collection of resources that we offer for teaching biodiversity and conservation. Our ambassador pages feature dozens of resources that can help educators and be adapted in a variety of ways for all sorts of classroom and learning settings. And so we hope that you'll check out those resources. Now in this session, you're going to meet some inspiring people, including E.O. Wilson himself, talking about the new graphic adaptation of his memoir, Naturalist. You'll meet a teacher who enabled his students to restore an exhausted farmland adjacent to their school. This land is now a haven for biodiversity and a living laboratory that's cherished by the entire community. You'll also learn about what cities are doing to protect biodiversity and enable all the young people that live in urban environments to experience nature close to home. I hope that you can stay with us to the end of this session so that you can hear from 4 amazing Half-Earth Project Educator ambassadors, talking about the challenges they face as teachers, but also talking about why they're so optimistic about their students' ability to take action to help protect our planet's precious biodiversity. Many of the session's participants have agreed to join the live chat and answer questions as this session runs today. And now, in our first segment, you'll meet an amazing educator with the ambition of bringing cutting-edge science and exploration live into the classroom. To achieve this goal, Joe Grabowski started an organization he calls Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants. And in just a few short years, this organization has grown to reach hundreds of classrooms and thousands of students worldwide.
Nico, how long will it take for the rhino to fully recover? Is it going to be sluggish for another hour or so? We're heading out into the field in South Africa with Nico from Rhino 911. Rhino 911 is an incredible organization that uses helicopter to get out into the field to assist rhinos in danger from poaching.
Good afternoon to everybody there, and nice having you live streaming with us today. Thank you so much.
It takes 30 seconds, then he's fully awake.
Well, welcome, Joe. Thanks so much for taking the time to participate in Half-Earth Day 2020. How are you doing today?
I'm good, Dennis. Great to be joining in. Thanks for thinking of us.
Well, Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants, you've collected explorers, scientists, adventurers who are willing, through video technology, to come into classrooms around the world live.
It's home to over 150,000 gannets.
Joe, have you got visual?
Yeah, we've got a visual. We can see them on the ground.
Yeah, so we're just gonna put away the camera.
You started this effort a couple of years ago. I want to start off by just give me some metrics. What's your reach these days?
Sure. Yeah, so we launched September 2015. We've probably run well over 2,000 live events. Hundreds of thousands of students across North America have joined in live and interacted via camera spots. And then we've worked with scientists and explorers for these events from over 80 countries. So we've got this great community of educators across North America, getting close to 10,000 strong now, who are taking part in these events and bringing the world live into their classrooms.
Yeah. So we're going to put the website up so people can see, encourage them to visit. Obviously, it's easy enough to find Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants. Now, your mandate and your network is very broad. In other words, all aspects of science and many aspects of conservation. And as you know, our focus is really biodiversity, species, conservation. That's really our focus. So I was so impressed this past summer when you did Global Biodiversity Festival. Just tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, so we were right in the middle of the COVID lockdown, and a lot of the reason why we're in this situation is biodiversity loss. Coming more as habitat is lost, we come more into contact with wild animals. Ecosystems lose kind of that buffer of biodiversity that they need to help protect against things like this. So it seemed like a good time to celebrate biodiversity and really kind of shed a light on it. May 22nd is the International Day for Biodiversity. We planned a 3-day virtual festival for the general public. We pulled 68 amazing speakers, conservationists, scientists, explorers from all around the world. We broadcast the weird and the wonderful. We shared the challenges life is facing and also some of those good news conservation stories, and ended up having over 100 countries tuning in live, and produced a really cool book based off the festival with the scientists and explorers sharing their perspectives from their work on biodiversity.
Now, Joe, both of us have talked about, we both have a passion and recognize the power of citizen science and community science these days. And again, sort of focused on biodiversity and observing nature. You've started another new initiative that you're calling Backyard Bio. Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, so we take students around the world, but the hope is that they'll learn about issues and species and things around the world, and then kind of turn a lens back on their communities and see what's similar, what's different, and how can they have an impact at a more local level. Backyard Bio is all about, especially with kind of the uncertainty around how classes came back, whether they're live in the classroom, whether they're at home doing distance learning. We want an activity they could all take part in and get outside. So we've encouraged students all September long to get outside, document the biodiversity in their area using apps like iNaturalist and Seek. Submit them to us. I think we're getting close to 15,000 observations that have come in so far this month, which is pretty cool. And then we're connecting some of those classrooms in different locations together so that they can compete against each other in like a friendly competition, who can spot the most. Really kind of shares that message with students that our planet is resilient. If we give it space, if we give it protection, it can bounce back.
Ben, be real loud, okay?
Hello, Ben.
Why do they like that island so
Got
much?
to tune in on some of your programs and have your questions answered. I mean, I can tell. I know it's inspiring to kids, and it just livens up the classroom in a way that would be hard to do any other way. Thanks for all this great work and for sharing this story with us, and look forward to continue to work with you in the future.
Yeah, absolutely, Dennis. My pleasure. And yeah, I hope any educators tuning in head over to exploringbytheseat.com, because 50 events a month, lots of opportunities. I bet will fit somewhere in your classroom.
Sounds great. Thanks, Joe. So Jim, tell me about Land Lab. What is Land Lab and how did it get started?
So Land Lab is a conservation restoration project that was started by students about 7 years ago, and in my AP environmental science class. And their goal was to give back to the environment, increase biodiversity, to create an area where education could really happen on the ground. And more students getting involved, more and more partners. And now we have about 100 acres of prairies and wetlands and forests for the community and the students to go out and kind of engage in outdoors.
So if I'm understanding right, this is land that is directly adjacent to the school and was cornfield?
Yeah, so when it first started out, we had a piece of land that we purchased and put a school on, and then we had some additional land out there in case we wanted to build another school. So all total in front of the building and behind the building, there was about 125 acres that was just being leased out to a tenant farmer for corn and soybeans. And when the students started working on this project, that seemed like a likely place to start a restoration project, because they thought that was an area that we could definitely impact the biodiversity.
What's your advice to a teacher who would like to do something like this?
So our district has gotten heavily involved in what is called project-based learning. And I've become a huge believer in that over the years now. This project and all the time that it consumes is far and above the best thing I've ever done. And I think, when we really look at what we want to accomplish in education, we want kids who not just, learn content, but understand the processes of thinking, to understand the processes of problem solving, life-changing to some degree. They had an opportunity to do something. And when I first started teaching this class on environmental science, it can be overwhelming. The fact that they've been able to engage in solutions has made all the difference in the world for these kids. They're optimistic about their futures. We've got things we got to do, but they feel that they can actually do them. They feel like they can have some impact on things moving forward. And if we can give that to kids, we've given them everything.
Like, so much land these days is used for development. Like, if there's any available space, it seems like our first priority is to figure out how can we make money off of that? How can we develop it, build on it, whatever it might be. And so to see land like that right outside of a school be set aside for the environment, for the natural world, that to me is really meaningful. Where somebody might drive by and just see a field full of weeds, I want them to see the animals and the birds and the things that are using that field and those marshes and those ponds. It's a special place that I want to help connect the community to.
If you were explaining what the land lab was to someone who didn't know what it was, how would you explain it? Like, what is the land lab?
I describe it as a great place to learn, a great place to have for a school, a great place to just interact with a lot of things that you don't get at regular schools.
Something to let you know, to learn about animals and to respect nature.
And expand our learning and be outside to learn.
One of the original objectives of the Land Lab was to increase biodiversity. And in fact, that was probably the #1 objective when this all started. We've done that to a very high degree.
Yeah, so the soras are, they're just kind of almost like little chicken-like birds that live in wetlands. And if I'm patient enough and quiet enough, I could probably get some pictures of them. Some pretty cool photos of them. At the Land Lab, I've seen 143 species. Total on the page, there's been 144 identified. So there's one that someone has seen that I haven't. I don't know which one it is, but yeah, we're up over 140 species just there at the Land Lab.
We've created something that is a true treasure and has really increased biodiversity. Not just birds. I mean, we've got mink now in the Land Lab, which is a really unique species. And not only unique from the sense that they're there, but from the educational opportunities that come from that, the research opportunities. We have one of the only pictures. There's been 2 since 1943 of a mink actually consuming a bullfrog as a food source, and we have one of those pictures taken in our Land Lab.
And I bet there was 40 people there planting trees. It was whole families. It was parents, it was their kids, and a lot of the parents were still in their business clothes, which just blew my mind. They were out there wanting to help plant those trees, and knowing that they didn't have a lot of time. So to have them out there was truly inspiring to me.
The idea of the burn is it kind of sets back the invasive species, and the prairie plants that have kind of evolved to deal with fire recover much faster from the fire than the invasive plants do, and as a result you give those a boost and you keep your invasives down. And where we're able to burn, we don't have a problem with invasive species at all. The fact that we are where we are with the Land Lab, I think, is a testament to the generation that I teach. I've been an environmentalist all my life. I've been a pessimist for most of it. The Land Lab has made me an optimist. I believe that we can solve the problems we face, and I believe that it's this generation that will do that. Personally, as a teacher, it is the single greatest educational project I've ever been involved in. I think the true importance of the project is something else that I believe very strongly in the ability of this generation to make a difference, to make a change.
We planted like 200 trees out there, and it would be really cool because over the years they're going to grow, and then maybe when my brother or sister is in that grade, they're going to be huge. So that'd be really cool to know that we planted those and that they've worked so well. It's almost like our Marco and Graham pool. Totally.
Rod and Mason are here to tell us a little bit about an amazing place called the Land Lab. And they also made this, along with some other students, made this film about the lab. But I wanted to start off just by asking you guys what you're up to now. What are you doing these days, Rod?
Well, I'm a third year at The Ohio State University. I'm living off campus with some friends right now while I study landscape architecture.
Oh, cool. How about you, Mason?
I'm currently a student at the University of Cincinnati, where I study international affairs and Spanish.
So both of you attended Granville High School, and as part of that, you were involved with the Land Lab. Tell me about what is Land Lab? So
the Land Lab was originally a project that came out of a bunch of students who were taking the AP Environmental Science class at the high school. And they do these things called Take Action projects, which is run by Mr. Redding. And essentially what he does is he just has students work on a project throughout the course of the year where they can take what they're learning in the environmental science class and institute it in like a hands-on project.
The land lab is full of, it's biodiverse, it's plants, and it's an area that animals that were used to be here and that were gone, like returned to. Anyone who knows Mr. Redding has taken any class with him knows about the land lab.
I love that. So as you come up, you're aware of this, and there's a legacy of that.
I think it has definitely had an influence on the community, but I still feel like not enough people know about it, which was one of the reasons we decided to make a documentary in the first place.
The interviews with the kids is really what got me, like they're so passionate. And I was thinking, like, back in intermediate school, like I didn't have any sort of like passion like at all, like this, like I was like most intermediate schoolers, like often doing my own thing, focusing on whatever, and these kids are out there planting trees, knowing that in 30 years, like that's where their efforts are going to show and stay there.
That just really like resonated with me, because I was like, oh, now I have this documentary that I can show people, and I'm like, I could have just stopped when like COVID happened and we all got sent home, but then because like Rod was like being so supportive with helping me with gather the footage and edit it together, I was kind of like, oh, let's just keep doing this. I really like what we're doing. And then now it's getting picked up by like USA Today and getting in the local paper, and cool to see how all of these things are going together. And like now we're kind of getting to leave our mark too.
I'm really glad that we could all get together to have this discussion, because it's just such a great community that you've put together there in Vermont. It started with attending Half Earth Day in 2018?
Yeah, that's right, Dennis. I had the very good fortune of knowing Ed Wilson, so I knew about Half Earth and what he was up to. And several years ago, I moved to Vermont and got very interested in the conservation work happening in the state, and was incredibly impressed. And I thought we needed to do more too. So as a result of that, I started like networking and talking to people like Walt and Sandra, and they talked to other people. And we gathered a little crew of, I think, 10 people, and we all traveled down to the Museum of Natural History for Half Earth Day in October of 2018.
I participated in the mapping activity at the Ambassador Workshop, and it was a really hands-on experience and forced, at least in the workshop, adults to have conversations about how we value the land and people, and making decisions about how to protect parts of the US. And that's an activity I brought back to my classroom, and I've done 3 times now over the past 3 years, and it's a different experience each time. But what I love about it is it raises kids' awareness of what is protected land. A lot of them, they know that they're preserves and national parks, but so they learn a little bit about what protected areas are and where they're located in the US. And that's a new experience for them. And then they're given the challenge to try to protect 50% of the US. And they engage in conversations about, where do humans reside, and how do we value timber, and where do we need agricultural hubs in the US. And no student pair necessarily approaches it the same way, but the takeaway is it's a complex task to try to come up with 50% of the land conserved.
And I love that every solution to this design challenge is different. Every team comes up with something different. This is a broad coalition. There's lots going on, and in addition to education, there's really an effort to take conservation action.
We sort of started reaching out to this extensive list of potential partners in Vermont. And Vermont's a small state. It's a largely forested state. And so it's got an incredible biodiversity as it stands right now, from the shores of Lake Champlain up to the Green Mountain ridges. And so, and we're really lucky to have a lot of dedicated conservation scientists in the state who have been really looking at the similar kinds of questions that really Ed Wilson has posed, and how do we work in inhabited landscapes, and figure out how to conserve as much of the biodiversity as possible. But what also came through with these meetings, but we convened a gathering of about 100 people out at North Branch Nature Center, was that, well, wouldn't it make sense if we focused at the watershed level? And the watershed, we have a major watershed, the Winooski River watershed here in Vermont, and it really, it kind of was a chance to, how do we look at biodiversity at the same time as we're looking at water quality issues, at the same time we're looking at local food production. All these came together, and really our focus became on how do we reach the community, especially educators, and work with those educators who are working with students and are working with their communities to really implement the science. So that was our plan.
Open it up a little generally to the group. Tell me a little bit more about, what does the Alliance look like today? How do you feel about the, progress of the last couple years, and maybe a little bit of what are you thinking about going forward?
In one of our meetings last year, we talked about how we can educate some of the teachers across the state about biodiversity. And so this past summer, the North Branch Nature Center hosted a biodiversity course for teachers. And it was primarily targeted toward middle and high school teachers. And we had a pretty good turnout considering the COVID restrictions. I think we were at our max with this class. And I think the best part for me was that it was primarily made up of teachers in my district. So I was able to get other middle school and high school teachers to take this course with me to just increase their awareness of biodiversity across the state. And so that was a huge success. And then from there, we designed a BioBlitz in our whole district. So we've got the 2 middle schools and the high school battling it out in a BioBlitz this week.
I'd love to pivot to Eric. So Eric, maybe just a quick word about this this field naturalist program that you were part of, and your project to uncover some of these stories, to dig into some of these great half-Earth stories there in Vermont.
Yeah. So I just graduated this spring from the Field Naturalist program at the University of Vermont, and it's a program that teaches students how to tie together all the different field disciplines and understanding how natural areas work, from geology to forestry to botany, and to sort of be detectives on the landscape and understand how the landscape works. And then we also focus heavily on communication. And instead of doing a master's thesis, we do a master's project. And so Walton, the rest of the Vermont Alliance for Half-Earth, contacted my program and asked if there was a master's student that could help them out furthering these half-Earth ideas in Vermont. And I applied because I'm very interested in biodiversity and very concerned. So I applied, and they thought that I would be a good person to work with them. And they gave me this really wonderful sort of open-ended project that at least I interpreted as, let's see what we can do to help out the Vermont Alliance for Half-Earth further their goals for the next year. And so I did some thinking, and through these meetings at North Branch Nature Center, we all kind of realized that Vermont already has the science to conserve all of our biodiversity. We have a fantastic map that designates, I think, about 60% of the state as being both intact and really important for biodiversity, conserving biodiversity. And it also has management practices that are recommended in each of those locations. So it's kind of the holy grail of Half-Earth's goals, a map that tells us where we need to protect biodiversity and what we need to do there. Nature is such a great way to, care for the people around us in our communities. And I hope people stop seeing it as a conservation of nature as this sort of side project that some people care about and the rest of us don't. Yeah.
Well, that's great. Thanks for that, Eric. And once again, thanks everybody. Thanks so much for taking the time to have this discussion and share what you're doing and what you've learned up there, up in Vermont.
Hi everybody, it's Tim Beatley here from the University of Virginia. Happy to have this time to talk a little bit about the Biophilic Cities and its connection to Half Earth. I had a hand in helping to create this global network of cities around the idea of biophilia, which is something that E.O. Wilson has had such an important role in popularizing and helping us understand. It forms the basis for our vision of what cities can and should be in the future. Biophilic cities are profoundly natureful. They work to connect their residents to the natural world, and they do everything possible to incorporate nature into the design of that place. From rooftop gardens to living facades to food-producing gardens to urban wildlife, incorporating trees and forests and biodiversity in all forms, we imagine a immersive nature, a nature in which humans living in cities are not separate from, but are a part of the natural world. Let's start out by visiting a neighborhood in Portland, Oregon, where we find a very unique species, the Voxus swift. These swifts have lost much of their original old-growth forest habitat, but they've adapted by taking up life in the city as they move through the city during the month of September, roosting in very dramatic fashion, a chimney in an elementary school.
So we're in Northwest Portland at the Chapman School, which is home to what we believe is the largest Vox swift roost in the entire world. They're in the process of migrating. They spend their breeding season up here in the Pacific Northwest into British Columbia. They're a long-distance migrant. And one of the things that swifts do is they form these giant communal roosts. They all gather together in the evening, and if we still had many around, they would roost in hollowed out old growth trees. They would use hollow trees to roost. We don't have a lot of those left, and so they've substituted chimneys. It's a very pleasant evening on the hillside. It's a fun place for kids to play. You'll see them sliding down the hill on cardboard boxes. Good place to picnic. Just a place that builds community, and I think it's just an incredibly positive thing to see a community come together like this in the middle of a city around nature.
And it's fun and entertaining for families, but this has a lasting educational impression on the young people. And I think for many of them watching the spectacle of nature, it's a lifelong memory. A number of our biophilic cities also have programs for educating kids about nature and actually incorporating nature into the teaching mission of schools. One wonderful example in the Atlanta area is the Chattahoochee Hills Charter School. And it's a very different kind of school. The kids come prepared every day with their coats, their boots, and they're prepared to be outside. And they're prepared to take their lessons and to take their math and their science and to go out into the forest. Let's hear from a few of the kids involved in that program.
Great. We came up here sometimes and we planted some things.
We have to plant them and we have to learn and know what they are, and we have to do some research about it and learn what the plant needs, and then we plant it.
We're outside a huge percentage of the day.
And we have to bring our discovery journals to write about what we learned on the trails or what we're seeing.
They're not afraid, and it's so amazing because we wear our uniforms, and that's because we tell parents, don't expect your child to come home clean every day.
Now I'd like to share a story that takes place on a truly impressive scale, reforming a city's metabolism from one that's biodiversity destructive to one that's biodiversity restorative. That's not easy or simple, but people in New York City are doing just that in the case of the New York Harbor.
The water is the new sort of front, and of course there are challenges with that situation because we face, plus 30 inches of sea level rise in the sort of midterm, and we have increasing storm surge and hurricane activity, and so we developed this strategy of a breakwater that is then seeded with oysters. So it is a piece of infrastructure day one that takes the wave action and lowers the velocity of the wave action, combining that with an onshore dune to reduce flooding, and that structure is seeded with oysters through the Billion Oyster Project.
What are we looking at here?
We're looking at two different species of algae. We have the Isochrysis and we have the Tetrasomas. So we feed our larvae and our oysters two different types. So the tetra would be more for the adult oysters, and the isochrysis would be more for the larvae, since they're so small and they can't really digest the tetra because it's so big. So this is basically a setting tank. It's where we stack bags of shell and for larvae. Larvae is basically...
They're oysters.
Yeah.
Oyster larvae, yeah.
Baby oysters.
Baby oysters.
And they, after a while, they tend to set, and they need something to set on. So we use reused oyster shells, which we get from restaurants, where they throw out their shells.
Everywhere you go on the planet, if you want to increase and preserve biodiversity, if you want to slow down climate change, this idea of rewilding natural places and unnatural places, I think, is a really powerful concept that we really like the idea of here in New York Harbor. What's particularly exciting about it is that there is not a constituency that's really against that. Particularly because Billion Oyster Project was born out of the harbor school, and we had great relationships with all the maritime operators in the harbor. They trust us, so they know that we're not going to try and do something to injure their use or diminish their use of the harbor. This is one of the most ultra-urban, highly degraded marine ecosystems on the planet. And yet these oysters are living. Kids are getting engaged in planting them. We've done 20 million. I think it's really exciting to think about it not just as a model for what it means here, but for what we can pull off for biodiversity around the planet.
Biophilic Cities is an international movement, and American cities could learn a lot about how to thrive with nature from cities around the world. I'd like to travel now to Singapore to close out this segment. One of the most important things we can do to foster biophilia in young people is for them to be able to see it. Seeing nature right where they live heightens their appreciation and gets them asking questions. It's a gift for a lifetime of learning. Here's a beautiful story of what one city has done to support a single species, and in the process has restored an entire urban river ecosystem.
It's always good to see a wild animal and even a predator living within a highly urbanized city like Singapore. I mean, people would just expect our rivers and reservoirs to just be to just serve the function of flood control and maybe to store water, but to see wildlife and to see otters within our highly urbanized country, I mean, it kind of gets people excited and want to know more about wildlife, and I think this is a very important stepping stone for them to get closer to nature. So maybe otters as the first step, and then maybe they'll get to know more about the ecosystem that otters are living in. Maybe they'll be interested in the fish, or maybe they'll be interested in some of the mangrove environment that the otters may also live in, and from then on having a closer connection to nature.
The ecological footprint of cities has a huge impact on the natural world, often distant nature. So there are some really essential roles that we believe biophilic cities can play in advancing the vision of Half Earth.
The Long Run is a global alliance of like-minded individuals that all run nature-based businesses that are trying to have a positive impact from an environmental and social and cultural point of view. What unites the Long Run members is that they all are looking after an important chunk of biodiversity that needs preserving. They're all embedded in a local community, and they all think that culture is a very important ingredient in their businesses. The idea of the Long Run is really to grow its footprint around the world. We want to preserve 20 million acres by 2020 and affect 2 million lives positively with the Long Run members that are operating around the world. The Long Run is all about using the framework of the 4 Cs of conservation, community, culture and commerce to really manage your land or your water in a holistic way.
4 Cs is just a great structure to introduce a wee bit of discipline to what you're doing. It gives you something to set targets, to measure yourself against. That's really important if sustainability is going to be about more than words, and about action and results at the end of it. One of the things that really attracted us to the long run was the name. We are in this for the long run. It's not all about profit, it's about the people and it's about the place.
The long run brings people together that all share the same passion for the environment and for their communities and for the culture that they are embedded in, and who want to make the world a better place and make sure that we can preserve nature while we are creating win-win situations for nature and people. The long run is also about sharing. We can every day learn how to make things better, and all of those members of the long run, they are operating on the ground on a daily basis. We share best practice, and that helps all of us to get better in the future. We all have goals that we want to accomplish, but it's not something that you can accomplish in a year or two. We all have a very long time horizon in mind, and sometimes think from generation to next generation, and I think that's what makes the long run unique, because you're setting your business up truly for the long run.
I'm Sibylle Riedmiller. I'm educational planner and have worked most of my life in the aid industry. And when I came to Zanzibar in '91 for a consultancy, this was with Finnish Aid on environment education, action plan, what can be done. So I negotiated for 4 years with 7 government ministries for this Chumbe Island to be turned into a marine park, which is not for profit. It is for conservation and for education.
Since the education program has started here, more than 7,000 people has reached on island through the education program. And this is very important because for the school education trip, we prepare these kids to be the future conservationists, future fishermen, and the future people who will look after their resources.
Education has been the backbone of the project from the very beginning. I'm an educationist, so that's the main motivation why I did it.
When they are here, they get a full training, and when they go back, actually we expect them to be peer educator to their school.
The main objective of Chumbe is for protection of coral reefs.
Yeah, I have a message for those tourists. First, I tell them they are warmly welcome to Chumbe Island because we have a unique thing which available in Chumbe. It's only Chumbe which able to do environmental conservation in a 100%. Nothing else. If they want to prove it, welcome to Chumbe. We'll prove it.
They say you are what you read. Our next segment focuses on a book that has nourished me over the years, E.O. Wilson's memoir, Naturalist. It's a book that's inspired millions of readers since the mid-1990s. An exciting graphic adaptation will be available in early November. And in this segment, you'll hear from E.O. Wilson himself the creative team, and teachers who are eager to have their students read this fresh version.
I wrote Naturalist in the 1990s when I was in my 60s, late in my career as an active research scientist. I wanted to tell the story of how I grew up and came to be a successful scientist and a writer. I hope to show others that it's not so far-fetched to find success in your passion, even if that passion is something like snakes and butterflies and ants. Looking back, like most people, I had both advantages and disadvantages in my youth. I try to be honest about my strengths and weaknesses. I'm gratified that readers have been inspired enough by my story that Naturalist has remained in print all these years, even enjoying a 25-year anniversary. But today, I'm really pleased to say that a graphic version with stick figures and quotations and balloons is soon going to be published. I was privileged to work with such a talented team at Island Press to adapt my stories, my memories, some of my scientific discoveries even, to this striking graphic format. My original intention and words are there on the page, but now accompanied with funny and evocative images. I hope that this version will find a new generation of readers, particularly young students who might come to have some of my interests, concerns, and ambition. At the end of this presentation, I'll return to read some excerpts from the new book.
I'm really excited to bring you an interesting creative team. We're going to talk today about how the graphic treatment of E.O. Wilson's a very successful book, Naturalist, was put together. I've had the chance to look at a pre-publication copy. I think this book is connected with lots of people. Hi to my cohort of discussants here today. Hi, Chris, how are you doing?
Oh, I'm doing good. It's a little early, but I'm doing well.
Good morning to you in Hawaii, is that right?
Yeah, exactly.
And then hi, Rebecca, how are you doing?
Hi, I'm doing well. Yeah, not so early for me. I'm over in Washington, D.C.
You're in D.C., okay. And then how about you, Jim?
I'm here in Michigan.
You got started, you sort of made this decision, kind of a commitment. This really is a project.
Rebecca's instructions were to not depart from the book. I cheated a little in a couple places because I couldn't help myself. Pulled in just a couple grace notes, I think, from some of his other books or from some of the interviews that I listened to or saw with him. And then we get to find out what it's going to look like when a professional artist with actual skills in literally depicting something does with those ideas.
The fun part about doing a book like this is when Jim takes a section out of the book and it says it's Alabama 1946. Well, that place where Ed was in 1946 doesn't look anything like. You can't look up Google Maps and say, okay, that's Alabama in 1946. So now comes the internet hunt, and a lot of the cities that I drew in this book came from postcards that I found on the internet. Locations that Ed mentions come from me going through Alabama's photo archive, trying to find the exact street corner, trying to find what those restaurants look like. And for me, that's the fun part.
He did take a look at kind of batches of the roughs and the rough sketches and gave some feedback, although usually it was along the lines of, I didn't have a dog at this age, I had an alligator instead, so we could incorporate that kind of
more actually way
thing,
better.
Which is
So
yeah,
much
it's
better.
much cooler.
This one I pulled out because I liked how you broke the frame here, and I thought it might be interesting to talk a little bit about how that came out.
This, I think, was a generous way for both Rebecca and Ed then to accept that we were going to literally put old and young, or sometimes I think Chris, were there even occasions when it's like 3 ages of yeah.
Yep. Yeah.
You know, I'm sure Chris wanted to punch me in the nose across the ocean a couple times, but for making me for suggesting that we do this. But this is one of the things that you can do in comics that is almost impossible to do in other media.
I think this is a good example of, since I'm someone who's more new to comics, I've read a lot of comics, but I certainly hadn't been involved in making any before. Having multiple eds is something that I had to get used to. I wasn't quite sure about that at first, but the more I worked with both Jim and Chris, it started to make a lot more sense, and a really nice visual representation of what a memoir is, really, a person looking back on their life and reflecting and kind of interacting with their past self.
And I'm sure students will pick out different ideas from a particular passage in the book and come up with something completely different. And it can also work.
There's still this tendency to think, well, it's a comic book, so it's for younger people. Who do you have in mind when you were working on the book? Who do you hope? Obviously, we want everyone to read it, but did you have anyone in particular that you were hoping might be drawn to this?
It's not just for a science person. It's someone who digs science. This is for someone who's interested in a new way of looking at the world.
Yeah.
And comics provide a new way of looking at an original text. And E.O. Wilson's life provides people with a great new way of looking at the world outside them.
I am a 9 through 12 English teacher in North Carolina, and I actually work at a magnet school. So I have the privilege of teaching 9th grade English 1, and that's more of a survey course, so a lot of options there for bringing in a variety of texts. And then I also teach a English course for our magnet program that's more of a college prep course. And that too affords me a lot of opportunities to bring in contemporary text, to bring in things beyond what we might think of the traditional literary canon. And so for me, that's one of the things that's really exciting about this project. One, that it's based off of a prose work, so it's based off of the Naturalist, and then also it's been turned into a graphic novel. So there are a lot of possibilities there for comparison and for discussion about the different text types and choices.
I have been a high school science teacher in Baltimore City for 11 years. I started teaching biology, then I moved into physics, and I've been spending the most of my time in chemistry. I have had the privilege of teaching at 2 very different schools, one that was vocational centered, and I'm at a school now that I've been at the longest, that is arts integrated, project-based learning. So we're really progressive and trying to find new ways to get students engaged in the learning process. So I work with some amazing educators there and always trying to change the way we approach science.
What did you like about the book? I mean, both personally and maybe a little bit of how do you see that students might connect with Naturalist?
Yeah, so I'll answer what I personally connected with first. I have no experience, like the science field is not where I'm at all. I believe in conservation and I applaud all of the work towards it, but I do not like even going outside, like it looks nice from my window. And so just on a personal level, it was really powerful and beautiful for me to read this graphic novel and to read about Wilson's life and how he became involved in science, and just the minute details and the experiences were written in such a way that it felt not applicable to my own life, but very much that I understood that sense of wonder and that sense of discovery, and also that desire to keep learning, because those are things that I do possess. I don't want to go and pick up ants at all, but I like that idea of wonder and being excited about things, and also being very humble in that journey and in that learning. So that resonated with me personally. As far as an educator, I think what was really important is some of the visual choices made. And in our earlier conversation, I talked about certain choices made by the illustrators and by the graphic novelist of having scientific names for things. I thought that was such a cool, that's something that you see in like a science textbook, right? You don't see it in graphic novels are different than comic books, but you don't see it in comic books. And so I thought that choice was really interesting. And I thought the play with some of the panels and carrying images off into it's called a bleed, but bringing them out of the panel. And I thought that there was a lot of room for conversation with students. And because it's visual, it allows those conversations to feel more accessible to students who perhaps view themselves as struggling readers, who might not normally engage in a prose text. And so those are a couple of things that I just, in reading personally, I thought about how I could bring it back to my classroom.
And I should say opportunities for conversation that other texts aren't awarding me when I try to integrate them into a science classroom. So finding engaging reading that is actually nonfiction, in this sense is really unique. And in addition to the idea that you're exploring that beautiful wonder and curiosity that I believe is the best part of science, there's so much that I think translates into that social emotional development. So many of my students I have, in the years have talked to them well, I can't be a scientist, or my life is difficult and I have these hardships and I'm not sure that I'll be able to become, the thing I hope to be. And I think what this book can do and what I'm hoping to incorporate back into my classroom is the idea that our experiences, are the adults in our life, the place we grow up, the education system that we're a part of, all of it shapes who we are, and it doesn't hinder us from becoming what we want to be. And I think that engaging students in conversation around the experiences that shape them and their journey towards whatever their passion may be, while also including the science and the Latin terms and finding ways to engage in, I think of arts integration right away with design your own page for a graphic novel and include little science words, go home, take a picture, and where can you label, the genus and the class or the family in this picture. So I'm thinking of a lot of ways that it can be a, cross-curricular dream for a team to try to work on, as well as differentiating. I also feel like it can bring in a lot of students that may even feel strong in English, but check out in science or vice versa, and build that confidence when it comes to engaging in scientific experiences.
Race was emphatically not on the official Boy Scout agenda. All the boys in the handbook for boys were white, and so were all the scouts I knew. New troops formed all the time, though, and I was invited to give a short talk to one just starting up in a black rural area near Bruton in South Alabama. I did not feel pride in the example I was supposed to show. I felt shame and was depressed for days afterward. I knew in my heart that these boys would have few real advantages, no matter how gifted they were or how hard they worked. I knew that the doors were open to me, were shut to them. Then I gradually forgot about the matter. What could I do? My mind was on other things. I was filled with ambition and anxiety and did not have a strong social conscience. Civil rights activists who risked their lives to break segregation nevertheless were heroes to my liking. Single, for a moral code, physically courageous, and enduring. I was impressed by them. They made me look again at my own social heritage, but I cannot claim to have been a liberal as a boy and a young man, certainly not one with as much foresight or courage.
I will just say that this exact moment in the book is one of those moments that I was referencing earlier, that idea that you are pulled in different ways by the experiences that shape you, but also having those outward social pressures playing into your development. And I just felt especially between like this scene and that next scene, how many people in those really important developmental stages can fall victim, can feel these things and then not know what to do with those feelings. And I think as far as having a conversation with students, I think it'd be amazing to talk to Ed about it, obviously. But having conversations with students about something like this could really be a great lesson in itself. Whether it's through English, through writing, or, through just dialogue in class, I think this is a great place to allow students to express maybe their what if. How would you have,
The conversations surrounding those 2 pages are like timely given our current world, if you will. And so I do think it's really interesting to discuss. Again, we talked about time, we talked about reflection, we talked about humility and demonstrating humbleness. And I think that is really important, that there is this moment of reflection here that it's not something that if I'm saying, okay, tell me about how you became this well-known scientist and this well-recognized scientist, this isn't a moment that I would say, oh yeah, this is going to be in there, and yet it's included, and what is the reason that this is being included? And I think there's to build off of what we were just discussing, I think there's a big moment of acknowledging the past in order to move forward and be better and be a more of who you are meant to be. But if you do not acknowledge the events in your past that did directly or indirectly shape you, then you can never fully fulfill. And I think it is really important. Again, I was thinking a lot about the activity that you see all the time of draw a picture of a scientist, because we're trying to break those assumptions in students. And here, I think this is important. Tamara, you mentioned earlier, the word brave. And I was like, yeah, if I was drawing a picture of a scientist, is that a quality I'm going to depict? No, I'm going to draw the glasses and I'm going to draw the lab coat. Let's be serious. But then here, brave and humble and realizing wrongs that were made and how do we right those wrongs, because that's true in an experiment, but it's also true in life.
To talk with such great teachers like you, your students, your schools, your communities are so lucky to have you. But anyways, I just want to, in a much smaller scale, thank you for taking the time to discuss this graphic naturalist.
Thank you for giving us the opportunity to see this amazing book. So thank you.
Absolutely. It was, as I said before, it was a privilege. I love being in a room with smart people. That's you don't want to be the smartest person in the room, and you learn so much, and that's what happened right now.
Well, welcome everybody. Thanks so much for taking the time. I'm really happy to close Half Earth Day 2020, the education session, with this roundtable. So I've asked you all here to really talk about what I think is a really tough and important question. And that's, how do we do a better job of engaging students while they're in the classroom?
It's been on my mind a lot with most of us now either hybrid or virtual teaching. I think my normal answer would be experiential learning, even in and out of the classroom, and doing hands-on activities is kind of the cornerstone of engaging students. But obviously, I was just having a conversation with a colleague on the way over here. We're really feeling, a little bit strapped in that area with less kinesthetic being allowed. So what I keep coming back to in my classes is just, something that the NGSS also really heavily emphasizes, which is this real world phenomenon. If my goal is that if a student leaves my class and said, I don't know why we learned that today, or I have no idea why that matters, then I've failed as a teacher. Because if I'm just teaching them a bunch of biology words and they have no idea what the context for any of that knowledge is, then they've just memorized a few words and they have no idea about the greater importance of what I'm trying to teach them as students.
What a lot of systems aren't doing is trusting teachers to be the innovative creators that we want to be. There's so many restraints in so many places, and I feel like I have been so lucky to be trusted to experiment just like a scientist would with the way that I engage my students. I think the progressive nature of the way that I approach science is what a lot of great teachers all around the world are doing. But it's about asking those big essential questions, like, what am I made of? Like, where do I come from? These big questions, but then allowing students to wrestle with it, not avoiding controversy, allowing them to be the leaders in finding solutions to problems.
Joe, your organization, Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants, is really designed, to bring current cutting edge science, right into the classroom and to bring that sense of adventure.
After a few years of teaching, I just didn't feel like I was reaching my students the way that I wanted to. I felt like I was doing maybe too much pen to paper, too much use of the textbook. I need to find a way to shake things up a little bit. So I started inviting scientists, explorers, adventurers, and conservationists to join my class, join virtually, share their experiences around the world. And my students just went nuts for it.
With working with my class, I had mostly juniors and seniors. And when we're 4, 5, 6, 7 years old, we're constantly asking questions. We're constantly out observing. I mean, we're fascinated by everything around us. And at some point, education kind of takes that away from us. And we tend to sit back and just absorb information rather than go out and search for answers. And so I think what helped in my class as far as engaging the students is to have them start asking the questions again.
So I'm wondering what your thinking is on, experiential learning and being outside and how best to relate that back to what's going on in the classroom. I mean, it seems like a tough thing, and the old model was you do a field trip, and honestly, most of those field trips never go anywhere, right?
I found, oftentimes by taking your students somewhere in the world, introducing them to a place, a scientist, an issue, an explorer, that kind of event often gets them to kind of turn their eyes back onto their community. So they learn about a cool species, they learn about an ecosystem, or a global issue, whether it's plastics or something. And oftentimes they want to turn around now, okay, if this is happening here, what's happening in my community? And if this is happening in my community, what can we do about it? So sometimes looking out at the world actually turns out, to have students focus more on the world around them after they learn a little bit more about things that are happening.
As someone who comes from a science background who then became a teacher, I really struggle with this exact subject because teaching in an urban system, many people know funding is always a problem, and we get less and less and less money every year. I teach at school without, Bunsen burners for chemistry. We had to get everything donated that we could. So getting students on a field trip to get them places is one of the hardest things that we face, and how we have to figure out how to get the money, to get the buses, to get them there. And so it's a lot of finding ways to use our backyard, use the city, the urban environment as our playground, and finding creative ways to have students recognize that there's biodiversity in a city. There's so much of this encouragement of getting everybody out. But I think we're all starting to recognize how much there is to offer in these urban environments. So, having students get engaged in distance learning and make public service announcements about water conservation, about, the biodiversity in their neighborhood and the plants growing. And I just think it's really important to remember that even without the access, like you've mentioned, you can have students start to make those real world connections. You just have to kind of meet them where they're at and allow them to feel like it's in their reach.
Do you have advice for other teachers who want to, do something extra, make their, just do more for their students?
I learned kind of early on that, and I think this was mentioned earlier too, we're so hung up on having the right answer all the time, of knowing the answer. As teachers, to stand up in front of the students and not know the answer is a very scary thing. It's scary for the kids as well to not have the right answer to put up their hand. So I think that's one of the things, just create a culture in your classroom where it's okay to have the wrong answer, where it's okay to fail. I mean, you as they say, you fail forward, that's science.
When you stop thinking of your class as like, all right, my admin is telling me I need to cover this, so I'm just going to do it and put my head down and cover it, and start looking around what's actually happening in your class and saying, like, I wonder why that's happening. I wonder why they loved this topic but not that topic.
Why are you optimistic? What are you optimistic about?
I know I'm optimistic because I see the change in my students entire outlook after one, 6-week unit on something like water or microplastics. You see them become these change agents. They become the change agents that we're hoping for.
They're ready. I mean, I think if you give them the opportunity to come to the table, they will.
I see a lot of hope in youth. I see how engaged and excited they are. I see when we do an event with rhinos in Africa, I can see the look of awe on their face, and I can see them putting 2 and 2 together about how we could lose this amazing species. So I guess my hope is seeing how excited youth gets when we engage them in biodiversity and learning about our planet.